We've been following Matt Taibbi a little bit and the Twitter files a little bit, but not as closely as we've been following, say, Julian Assange. But there's a lot of parallels at this point. Obviously, Matt Taibbi's still free. He's not locked up, being held in solitary confinement, waiting to be extradited to the United States, where he'll likely be locked up for the rest of his life, the way Julian Assange is. But Matt Taibbi is now reporting to Chris Hedges, or Chris Hedges is now reporting about Matt Taibbi that he's being targeted by intelligence agencies, that he's being targeted by the U.S. ruling class. So we recently had friend of the show, Tara Reid, who was actually forced to flee to Russia, seek asylum in Russia because she was being targeted by U.S. intelligence agencies. And Matt Gaetz told her, Tara, you're being targeted by these Western intelligence folks. You probably want to do something for your own safety. So she fled. Now they're looking at Taibbi for the information he revealed, with which Chris Hedges will expertly break down in this. He's been following it very closely, as well as the Assange case. But I figured it was worth doing a deep dive on this show since, like I said, we haven't been covering the Taibbi case as close as the Assange case. I want all of y'all, the audience, to be caught up on what's going on with Matt Taibbi, what he revealed, because there's a whole lot of disinformation coming out about it right now from the news outlets and from the Democratic Party that is constantly accusing other people in other countries of spreading disinformation. But obviously they're going to cover this story in a way that makes Matt Taibbi look really bad, makes him look like a criminal, justifies any kind of legal action against him. So it's important to be aware of what's going on with this story, because it's a really important story in the U.S. right now. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Chris Hedges on the Real News Network. I believe that's the name of this channel, because Chris Hedges actually had his previous YouTube channel completely wiped out, similar to our 7 TikTok accounts that were wiped out. So
the journalist Matt Taibbi has been targeted by the Democratic Party for exposing extensive government blacklists used to censor left-wing and right-wing critics. Given access to the internal traffic of Twitter by Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, he documented repeated cases where the FBI and other government agencies repeatedly suppressed news and commentary.
And one of the things they keep doing is being like, oh, he got it from Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a capitalist, oligarch, right-winger. Therefore, this information is invalid, and Matt Taibbi is a terrible right-winger who needs to be thrown in jail. It's like, just because he got information from someone you don't like doesn't mean that it's useless information. Like, come on, that's the immaturity of that. If Elon Musk, obviously I don't like Elon Musk. 99% of the content I've made about Elon Musk has been negative, about who he's a fraudster. But if he's going to give us access to Twitter and let us look behind the scenes, why would we not take advantage of that? It's like when Colonel Douglas McGregor or Scott Ritter or these people who were inside the State Department or the UN or inside the apparatuses of U.S. ruling class power come out and start telling us stuff about them. You have these purists like the Vanguard, this YouTube channel called the Vanguard, who will attack the Gray Zone guys for interviewing them. Like, why are you interviewing these guys? These are bad guys. These guys are part of the Pentagon and the U.S. military. Like, yeah, and they're telling us the Pentagon secrets. Why would we not listen to them and then use that strategically? Use that to share with the American public and show them what the Pentagon's doing with your damn tax dollars. Like, think strategically. Don't think in terms of good guys and bad guys. That's liberal comic book thinking.
Censored content was almost exclusively produced by those critical of the dominant narrative advanced by the Democratic Party and the old establishment wing of the Republican Party, which has joined forces with the Democrats. Threads that were censored include those from the Yellow Vest movement, activists from the Occupy movement, Global Revolution Live, negative stories about Joe Biden, reports on a Ukrainian energy company, Burisma, that paid Hunter Biden about $1 million a year while his father was vice president, positive stories about Venezuela.
The Hunter Biden story, too, I've seen so many leftists who refuse to touch it because CNN put out so much and MSNBC put out so much propaganda about it. Like, Joe Biden was one of the architects of the crime bill. right? He was giving speeches on the Senate floor about how nonviolent drug offenders are criminals and we need to get them off the streets before they come for me and your family. We need harsher sentences. We need to fill up the prisons. Meanwhile, his son is literally doing crack cocaine that he never gets in trouble for, that he only ever has to go to expensive, rehabilitation facilities for that are more like a vacation than anything. He's getting all this money through corruption and sitting on the boards of these energy firms because his dad's Joe Biden. And Joe Biden's giving speeches on the Senate floor about locking up poor nonviolent drug offenders. So the hypocrisy is insane, and we should be pointing that out. Anyone who calls himself a socialist or a leftist or a communist should be pointing out that, the head of the country has been arguing to lock up poor people for nonviolent drug offenses while his son is off doing drugs and getting away scot-free. But no, because it helps Trump. We just have to ignore it and pretend that it's a conspiracy theory. It's not. It's not. You can look up the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop right now. It's not a conspiracy.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro reports about Ukrainian human rights abuses and details of the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. The accounts were flagged and usually disappeared. The so-called quote-unquote moderation requests were sent by an entity called the Foreign Influence Task Force. The Foreign Influence Task Force is an FBI-led interagency task force that includes numerous government agencies, including Homeland Security, the CIA, the Pentagon, and the State Department. It flags what it considers objectionable content for about 24 social media companies, including Twitter, Facebook, Google, Pinterest, and Wikimedia. In March, Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger were called to testify before the Select Subcommittee on Weaponization of the Federal Government. While Taibbi was testifying on March 9th, an IRS agent visited his house in New Jersey. Taibbi discovered that the IRS opened a case against him on the day he published a Christmas Eve Twitter thread.
And do you remember? A lot of you probably don't remember because I'm sure a lot of you don't spend too much time on the cesspool that is TikTok. But when Joe Biden increased the number of IRS agents by like 50,000 or whatever, some insane number, I'm like, this is not a good thing. There were left-wingers, social democrats, radlibs cheering it on. Like, yes, now we'll be able to tax the rich. Joe Biden's not using those IRS agents to tax the rich. The rich own him. He's a puppet of the rich. He's going to use those IRS agents to nickel and dime us, to crack down on us. And I said this, and a bunch of radlibs got so mad at me. No, Biden's doing this to target only the rich people. Because that was the problem. We didn't have enough IRS agents. We needed 50,000 more. Now they'll tax the rich. It's not because of tax loopholes designed by the rich who own the government through lobbying and campaign donations. Like, how naive. It just shows that some people don't know how capitalism works, and some people don't know how the ruling economic class, or how deeply the ruling economic class actually controls our political system and actually controls these politicians like Joe Biden, despite their pro-working class rhetoric from time to time. Thank you so much, Battle Cossack. $100 super chat from Argentina. Really appreciate that. Appreciate you supporting the show. Appreciate you supporting our survival. Biden wants to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. What's next? White phosphorus? Are you kidding me? He does? And how many times has the U.S. dropped cluster bombs on countries now, even though it's been declared a war crime, even though you're not supposed to do it? I'm pretty sure they dropped cluster bombs on Yugoslavia as well. Yeah, I have a personal story about white phosphorus. So someone I know in the military showed me a video of his unit hitting a civilian with white phosphorus, which apparently the U.S. government, U.S. military doesn't use. So apparently that video was staged. My friend just made it up. But thank you so much for the super chat, Cossack.
From a letter House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan sent to the IRS Commissioner inquiring about Taibbi's case. It was a Saturday. It was Christmas Eve. Taibbi did not owe taxes. The case was 4 years old. All this suggests that the IRS case was politically motivated and the FBI was monitoring Taibbi. Taibbi ran into the buzzsaw of orchestrated character assassination when he testified. The Democratic members of the committee rarely let Taibbi speak. They delivered.
They're still finding unexploded cluster bombs in former Yugoslavia. This is true of Laos as well. Actually, Laos is the most bombed country on earth, and a third of the cluster bombs they dropped on Laos didn't detonate. So they're still just sitting in the soil to this day. And since the bombing stopped in the late 70s, or maybe not late 70s, but 70s, There have been over 1,000 Laotian people killed by bombs because they're farming, they're working out in the fields, and they come across one of these things and they explode on them.
Vicious and insulting diatribes, which were then broadcast on outlets such as MSNBC and CNN, part of the effort to further discredit him. The ranking committee member, Stacey Plaskett, sent Taibbi a letter accusing him of lying to Congress and threatened Taibbi with a 5-year prison sentence. Joining me to discuss this wholesale censorship and the efforts by the ruling establishment, especially the Democratic Party, to discredit him and his work is Matt Taibbi. Matt, let's go back to December 24th, 2022. You're in the Park 55 Hotel in San Francisco, and explain what you're doing.
Well, I was putting together the final touches on a story about, it was going to be called Twitter and Other Government Agencies. About a week and a half into the Twitter Files project, we found a series of documents that had come to Twitter through the Foreign Influence Task Force. And it was basically just a pile of reports that came from various government agencies. Sometimes we could tell which ones they were, sometimes not. But in essence, most of them were simply, a few paragraphs of text along with a gigantic Excel spreadsheet of account names. And they would say things like, we assess that the following are related to Russia's Internet Research Agency or are working to further anti-Ukraine objectives or whatever. And, we would check and see that sometimes all of the accounts were gone. Sometimes it was a percentage of them. But in most cases, there was some kind of action. And, this was an important story that we put out. I was very nervous.
So for those who don't know, this is what happened to us at TikTok. We had an account with almost 400,000 followers. We were sharing, our position on the war in Ukraine, which is that it's a NATO-led proxy war, that NATO, pushed us into the situation, showing evidence of the coup in 2014. And our account got removed. It got removed after TikTok was taken over, or at least the U.S. servers were taken over by Oracle, this company with deep ties to the CIA, who then hired a bunch of State Department and NATO officials to manage their content. So they promptly removed 300,000 accounts, which they just said were connected to Russia, right? And TikTok, like Twitter, has gotten a lot of attention because of Taibbi, and Mint Press News has been covering the TikTok thing, but it's kind of gone overlooked because I think people laugh at it like, TikTok, the kids' dancing app. But there were so many accounts like ours, explicitly Marxist accounts, anti-imperialist accounts, socialist accounts, breaking stuff down with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers. There are so many of us. And they just wiped them all off the face of the earth. Not only, stopped us from posting, but wiped out all of our past content. And 300,000 accounts they wiped out and just said they were connected to Russia, shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, they're Russian accounts. None of them were. Our account got banned. Obviously, we're based in the Midwest, no connection to Russia. My buddy Kami Trucker had his account banned. He's literally a trucker in Iowa. A collective account called the Vanguard of Marxists. Anybody telling about the truth about Ukraine was removed for being a Russian bot or whatever. And these liberal accounts, including ones that were actively doxing people and sharing their phone numbers and calling for people to be fired, calling for campaigns to call people's or contact people's employers and get them fired if they wouldn't, put a Ukraine flag in their bio and go, you rah rah NATO. Those accounts were boosted, and those accounts are still up to this day for the most part. So just blatant censorship, and the only explanation that they ever feel that they have to give is, these are Russian accounts, Russian misinformation. When the studies show that there are far more Ukrainian bot accounts and Ukrainian misinformation accounts than there are Russian accounts by a long shot. Where was the banning of 300,000 Ukrainian bot accounts, TikTok?
About it. It included information about the CIA, the DNI, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and that's what I was preparing to do on Christmas Eve.
And we should be clear that before you made this release on December 24th, the FBI had already denounced your work on the Twitter files, saying it was the product of conspiracy theorists. This is their quoting them, who fed the public, quote, misinformation, whose sole purpose was discrediting.
That's the other thing they got. You're a Russian agent. You're a conspiracy theorist. How? Well, we don't have to get into that, but you are, and you're banned.
The agency.
Right, yeah. In fact, I even referenced the FBI's quote in the beginning of the thread. Sort of sarcastically, I said, of course, my sole purpose isn't discrediting the FBI. There are other agencies I want to discredit as well. And the idea of that was to, among other things, make the public aware that the FBI had commented on the story, in a way that I think was intended to intimidate a little bit, in addition to not answering, the questions that we sent. But yes, they had already made it known that they were paying attention to the story, and that was unnerving certainly on one level.
Let's talk about the Foreign Influence Task Force. You said you estimate that it has a staff of about 80. What is it? Who's on it? To the extent that when was it set up, and how does it work?
I don't know a whole lot about when it was set up. Other reporters have done some work on that. Lee Fong.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael S., for the super chat. Second super chat of the day. Really appreciate you all. And as I said, these are instrumental to everything that we do at the Institute. I saw one of Carlos's talks recently where he said Russia wasn't working as an imperialist power, but they are capitalist and have motives that are not just to denazify Ukraine, but also are for economic reasons as well. I think we've been clear about this since the beginning. Like, it doesn't hurt Russia economically to control the Donbass and Crimea, right? There are economic motivations there, but there's, a reason that Crimea was given to Ukraine by the USSR as a gift back in the day, and why it was never taken back by Russia, even though in 1991 the Crimeans voted that they wanted to either become independent or join Russia. They wanted to leave Ukraine, which is a little known fact. But Russia didn't move to take it back until the 2014 coup, until NATO expansion into Ukraine started happening, until the NATO training and arming of troops in Ukraine started happening. And of course, the special military operation and the seizure or annexation or independence, you could even liberation of the Donbass regions who voted to join Russia, doesn't happen until much later, 2022, with the special military operation. So clearly these economic incentives weren't the driving force of the intervention, right? The driving force of Russia's special military operation, the main thing that made them do it was security concerns, was the NATO expansion that they saw as an existential threat to the Russian state if Ukraine were to join NATO. While there are economic factors and incentives that can be observed, you can't say Russia's acting as an imperialist power because they're not doing this to, seize those economic objectives and control those sources of production. The reason they're pursuing a special military operation is to defend their country's national security from the advancing imperialist apparatus of NATO. I believe that's Carlos's position as well. But thank you so much for the super chat and the solid question. Thank you.
Who's one of the Twitter Files reporters, had done some work on it. He was where we got the number 80 for staff for the FI.
I fully support Russia. Sorry, I just want to answer this because it's a good question. I fully support Russia assisting Eastern Ukraine. But why invade the rest of Ukraine? Well, because NATO has prevented any kind of peace deal, right? So Russia could liberate just Eastern Ukraine, but then those homes are still going to be shelled, right? There's still going to be artillery in the hands of fascists and neo-fascists in Ukraine, firing on the people of the Donbass, destroying their homes, and the fighting is going to continue. The warfare and bloodshed is going to continue. Ukraine's going to try and take these territories back, like what they're doing with their counteroffensive. Right, this stuff is going to continue to happen because NATO and the UN are blocking any attempt at a peace deal, as we've seen from recent reports from People's Dispatch and elsewhere. Anytime there's an attempt to make a peace agreement between Putin and Zelensky, NATO or the UN swoops in to break it up and say, no, we have to keep fighting down to the last Ukrainian. So the fighting continues, and Russia, has no option except for demilitarization and denazification, which they've said since the beginning. And, the longer this war goes on, the more likely it is that Russia will have to go all the way to Kiev and topple the Zelensky regime, right? If the fighting continues, if they can't sign a peace deal, if the U.S. won't let Ukraine sign a peace deal that says, fine, you get Crimea and the Donbass, but the fighting stops then, which is what Russia wants and what they've proposed like 3 times now. If Ukraine doesn't do that, then the fighting's going to continue and Russia's hand will be forced until they have to topple the regime. And then that'll just, that'll be the end of it then. And I don't know what'll happen. Maybe all of Ukraine gets absorbed into Russia. It'll be interesting to see, but that's why it's so imperative if you're in Europe or in the US to not buy the NATO line on this and push for a peace deal, right? By pushing for peace and for pushing to an end of the war where, Russia is going to receive the Donbass and Crimea, you're not being anti-Ukrainian, right? You're being pro-NATO. The pro-Ukrainian civilian position is to advocate for a peace deal, right? Because right now NATO is trying to push Ukrainians at gunpoint into the Russian meat grinder, the Russian military. That is not pro-Ukraine. So thank you for the insightful questions, Michael. I should probably get back to this, though. We're a little bit off track.
ATF. As far as we could determine, it was mostly comprised of FBI, Homeland Security, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The FITF essentially became like the throughway junction for government requests for content moderation. And the system they worked out was basically requests that came from the federal government would come through the FBI, and anything that came up through the states would come through DHS. And they had a very specific means of doing that. They had basically a communications platform they called Teleporter. It was like a one-way door. It was a little bit like Mission Impossible. Like there was a way to rig it so that once content went through there, it wouldn't last very long. It would delete after a period of time. But we recovered some of the stuff that was in there. But that's what the FITF does. And what's interesting about it, there are two things that are interesting. One, it claims that it's only monitoring foreign material, but we found ample evidence of them looking even at the accounts of very small, following American domestic account holders. And the other thing is, these are not personnel that are trying to make cases. They're just monitoring social media. It's FBI agents who, they're not trying to put together something for trial. They're just watching.
Well, they're not producing evidence.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not compiling anything toward any kind of case. Yeah.
Which is exactly how in the McCarthy era the FBI worked. They show up even at high schools. Elaine Schrecker's written about this with a list. There was no evidence. There was a list of names, and all of those teachers were gone. And not only were they gone, they were blacklisted.
Well, right, and that's one of the reasons why the church committee, one of the major reforms that came out of the church committee was a change in the whole idea of what the FBI would do. They had to have some kind of predicate to initiate an investigation.
Well, NATO and the State Department have been talking about this new Cold War with Russia and China, right? They want to revamp the Cold War. Why would they not revamp the Red Scare? Why not revamp McCarthyism, right? If you're going to try and lie the entire country into just holding this deep-seated hatred for countries in the East, for communist socialist countries trying to create a different economic system than us. If you're going to try and instill that in your people, you have to censor people who are giving an alternative narrative, censor people who are critical of your narrative, and boost shills like Philip DeFranco, former YouTuber turned puppet of the U.S. State Department and NATO. You got to boost people like that who are going to brainwash kids with pro-NATO propaganda on TikTok and YouTube.
We don't have that anymore.
It really is like they saw Midwestern Marx getting big on TikTok. They saw us almost hitting 400,000 followers, and they're like, oh, shoot, tag in Philip DeFranco. Tell him to start being just an absolute NATO shill. We'll boost his account, and then we'll start banning this Midwestern Marx guy. And we'll replace all this viral anti-imperialist content with the most pro-imperialist pseudo-intellectual dribble you could absolutely imagine, which is the kind of content that Philip DeFranco produces. And there you go. You'll have a generation, or we won't have a generation of kids who are socialist and anti-imperialist. We'll start pushing them towards supporting imperialism or woke imperialism or whatever it may be.
They started to make that change right around 2000.
All right, woke imperialism in itself is a strategy for bringing kids in, kids on TikTok who consider themselves radical, who want to change the society that we're in. But then the CIA will do commercials like, look how diverse we are, and we support mental health and racial and sexual diversity, to try and trick radical-leaning, left-leaning kids into supporting the CIA, an arm of imperialism controlled by finance capital.
2008 or so, but now it's firmly entrenched that the FBI is essentially a counterintelligence operation that has a criminal division to it. It's in the intelligence gathering business as much as it is the case making business.
So the FITF has an industry meeting. Explain what that is. And you had told me that at first it was monthly and then it was weekly as the 2020 election approached.
So the moment that I think was the light bulb moment for a lot of us on the Twitter file story was when we first found emails that talked about what you referred to, the industry meeting. And you would see something would be forwarded to one of the members of Twitter's Trust and Safety Department, and there would be an agenda, and it would come from the FITF. And you would see the agenda for what they call the industry meeting, and there would be all these people would be CC'd on the email. It would be probably 24 companies or more, and it would say something like OGA briefing (parentheses Ukraine). Right, so that would be at the top. And OGA, as you know, is usually a euphemism, either intelligence generally or the CIA specifically. We had emails that showed that the CIA attended a couple of these meetings, that they asked to be there. So we thought that was pretty damning stuff, because among other things, not only did it show that all of these companies were in regular contact with federal enforcement agencies, but that there was this rather elaborate anti-competitive situation going on that, I don't think anybody's even thought about that angle of it. The antitrust component of this, where you have 20 or 25 tech companies getting together and making secret agreements on what kind of content they're going to show the public. I think that's very serious. And it was all basically in one email. So that was what that was the kind of thing where you could show the public one picture and it would be powerful that way.
Is there any indication that they were producing content?
No, although we did have some indication from a couple of sources, and we were never able to really report this, but we heard it from enough people that I think it's worth mentioning that there were some indications that the government had some input into the drafting of the terms of service of some of these companies. Right, so we would see that the FBI was assigning lots of people to monitor different communications for possible violations of terms of service, and we even saw Twitter personnel complaining about that. One of the lawyers is saying, "My God, it's like they're entering search terms looking for."
So extensive infiltration of Twitter by the intelligence agencies. Of course, that leads to censorship. And I want to show you all quickly my evidence for the similar infiltration of TikTok that is very similar to what Taibbi is describing there with Twitter. Obviously, we don't have the TikTok files yet, but I was one of the accounts that got banned in this TikTok purge. But of course, TikTok was controlled by ByteDance, this Singapore-based company that the West has claimed is a Chinese-based company for some reason. Not for some reason, because they have to fearmonger about China. But anyways, when the algorithm was controlled by ByteDance, it was much better. Anybody could go viral, right? Literally anybody could go viral. Our videos would go viral all the time, and they still do, but it's more of a certain kind of video now. Back in the day, like anything could go viral. You could just make a video talking about how the U.S. put Augusto Pinochet in power and overthrew Salvador Allende. It'd get like 100,000 likes. So that kind of content was getting really, really popular, like actually radical, actually anti-imperialist content. So that's when Trump started threatening to ban TikTok, right? And when that was happening, I'm like, ooh, they're trying to censor all the anti-imperialist rhetoric that's going on this app, the anti-imperialist information that's being shared by the younger generation here. But instead of banning TikTok, what they did was force TikTok to hand over control of their US-based servers, their Western servers, to Oracle, this company with deep ties to the CIA that's based in Texas. And what Oracle immediately did was hire a bunch of national security agents and NATO operatives who banned 300,000 accounts for being connected to Russia. Let me see if I can find it. 320,000 Russian accounts were removed, and over 41,000 videos peddling misinformation about the war. So they hired a bunch of NATO operatives and wiped the app of content that was critical of NATO and people who were critical of NATO. This is deep, deep infiltration by the State Department and by NATO. And blatant censorship, blatant violation of freedom of speech. You can't even say that it's a private company doing it, so therefore it's okay, right? That's the argument that the ANCAPs will make. Oh, Twitter and Facebook should be allowed to censor you because they're private companies. Well, they're being pressured to by the intelligence agencies. They're hiring government officials, or State Department and NATO officials. So it's the government too. The private companies, the private corporations are just happy to go along with them for the most part. And ASPI, of course, is one of the main imperialist think tanks driving policy between the US, Australia, and UK right now. Their AUKUS alliance. But then every time you hear the government talk about, Chinese misinformation that's being spread through TikTok, it's complete nonsense. What they're talking about is people like Midwestern Marx who are sharing the reality of what the US government is doing with people and with kids. So they say China's spreading this misinformation. They're controlling us. We need to crack down. We need to crack down on TikTok. We need to get them to hire more CIA officials. We need more government regulation. We need more censorship of speech, to the point where the app, I still use it. It's still a good tool for drawing people into our content, but it's nothing like what it used to be. Everybody who's on TikTok now recognizes it's so easy to get banned on the app. It's like walking on eggshells all the time. And then that's because it's controlled by State Department officials. Literally. So yeah, I've tried to get like Jimmy Dore to pick this story up. I've tried really hard to get Jimmy to pick it up. I've tried really hard to get a lot of mainstream, quote unquote, internet news shows, internet commentators to pick up this story about TikTok and then interview us so we can be like, yeah, we had 400,000 followers on this app and they just wiped it all out. Because, if the Twitter files are such a big deal, obviously what Matt Taibbi revealed is pretty extensive, but if censorship on Twitter is a big deal, censorship on TikTok's a big deal too. It's just harder to get traction because I feel like, I don't think Jimmy Dore really knows what TikTok is that much. He certainly doesn't use it a lot. The only time he reacts to TikToks are probably just when his producers hand TikToks to him. But, a lot of these older journalists use Twitter to share information with each other and stay up to date. So, and by older, I don't mean really old, but older than I. I'm just a young buck in this game.